Thank you. Thank you so much for those nuggets of advice, which are really important for us at the junior faculty level to hear about the frequent rejections, the how to moderate our expectations. And that really just segues into the last part of the conversation, which is the under the hood, which we talk about the behind the scenes, the nitty gritty, the uncomfortable conversations. And I'm hoping that we can talk more about those things that you just said and perhaps inspire some of the early career people that are listening. So, I want to jump into the question about junior faculty. And so, you talked about early in the conversation about being an administrator versus doing more sciencey type stuff. And then you just talked about team science versus, working by yourself. And I want to pose the question, how should junior faculty prioritize their participation in these professional versus like academic service roles? So how do we balance that out in our early career?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I think, well, one, get a good mentor. Try and have a mentor that's in your department and get a mentor that's not in your department and talk to them both, because early career stage folks get pulled in a lot of different directions because they are super well trained. They have the latest and greatest training. They're doing cutting edge work, and they're getting pulled in a lot of directions in terms of people who want to collaborate with them and have them on their teams to professional service requests, outside of whether that's, I don't know. And so pre-tenure, your currency, well, depending on whether if you're in a hard money university like the UC, your currency are your publications. And then of course you want to get some grants so that you can support students to help you get your work done. But grants alone are not going to get you tenure. You need to publish. If you're in a soft money situation where you have to feed yourself with grants, then you're going to be teaching a lot less, and you're just a grant machine and a publication machine, and then you may teach a little bit, but it's a little bit of a different incentive structure. Service expectations tend to be a lot less because you have to spend a lot of time feeding yourself and feeding your lab. I think you want to make sure that any professional service that you do it not because you have FOMO, fear of missing out, or because somebody really flattered you and said you would just be like, because that's often what happens is people flatter you to encourage you to take on a task, serve on a committee. And I've made the mistake of saying yes way too many times, like that. I've gotten better, but I'm still, it's definitely still something I try and work at. So I think you want to do something that you're excited about and that you're passionate about, that doesn't feel necessarily like an obligation, because you'll have plenty of service obligations within the university. So your professional stuff should be things that you really enjoy doing, that also give you satisfaction, and that could potentially also advance your thinking about the work that you do, or includes a group of people with whom you've wanted to work before. Thinking a little bit selfishly, like, what will I get out of it? How will this advance my creativity? How will this advance my productivity? What kind of contributions will I be able to make? Will it help advance? Is it in the science policy interface and maybe enable me to do more research translation work where my work can have more of an impact? In which case, yeah, then maybe you do want to do it because you want to have opportunities to make sure your science has an influence. So I think those are kind of criteria that you want to think about when you're thinking about professional service, and you want to run it by mentors that you trust and who think like you, in terms of, for me, I want to do great science, and I want to make sure that science is able to be translated into some form of action. When I talk to mentors, and I still have mentors, those are the kinds of things that I talk to them about in terms of when I'm thinking about taking on new tasks.
That's super solid advice for junior faculty. And hopefully that can be helpful to the listeners, the audience for Under the Hood. And the next question I want to ask also is helpful for early career faculty who are on the job market.
Okay.
And so you alluded to your time at Brown and then your time at Berkeley. So my question is, what are some of the major differences between working at a public versus a private kind of Ivy League university for people that are on the job market?
Oh, okay. I went to public schools as a kid. I'm a product of Berkeley through and through. So I've always been public schools. So then I taught at San Francisco State. And so when I had an opportunity to go to Brown, I was like, I don't know, in part because also I never imagined myself going to an Ivy school. It didn't even occur to me to apply to one. And in hindsight, I probably should have, but I had a mom who was a professor, but she was like, do whatever you want. Like, she didn't like say you have to apply to these. I was, and actually I appreciate that in hindsight that she didn't push me. I didn't have a mother who was like telling me, or an academic parent who was telling me what to do with my life. So I was kind of skeptical about going to a place like an Ivy League school, but I really wanted to live on the East Coast, and people were incredibly nice, and they really seemed to appreciate what I could bring to the university. And so I figured, I would regret not trying it more. Like, I would rather go and have it not work out, but at least have the satisfaction of having tried it, rather than not go and wonder for the rest of my life, would I have liked that? So in hindsight, it was the right decision because I went there and I was very happy there. I think Brown is kind of unique in terms of the Ivies. People often like to refer to it as the UC Santa Cruz of the Ivies because it's a little more unconventional. It has a lot of resources that you don't necessarily find. So there's a lot of resources to help you teach well, for example. There are a lot of resources for students to apply for money to go work, and I was teaching courses that involved like students doing work with EJ groups in the East Coast and other environmental groups. And, those organizations don't have money to pay students. So Brown had programs where students could apply. And so the university would basically pay them to do the work in the summer that they were going to go do for the organization. So those were opportunities and resources that, we don't have as much of, in a public university. It facilitated, long-term sustainable relationships, and it enabled you to be nimble in terms of take on new projects with very little notice, because you didn't have to apply for a grant and wait for 6 months for it to come through in order to make it happen. You were able to find, you had a great student who was smart and very motivated and could get things rolling right away if an organization came to you to do things. So that was incredible. So the resources are amazing. Teaching load definitely lower. But awesome. And classroom size, a lot of resources to help you teach well. Great programs where you could have an English major work with you and help students develop outlines and ideas for their papers before they turn them into you. And then you would continue to work with the student, but they would sort of do some of the initial work, or they were willing to read rough drafts of papers before students turn them in. So those kinds of resources are kind of amazing and really help you teach well and engage your students and take them to kind of a whole new level in terms of learning. Some of the downsides that I didn't like so much, you don't have community college transfer students at a place like Brown. You just don't. And those are some of my best students. Those are students that, for whatever reason, didn't go straight to college, and maybe they didn't, life didn't go so well in high school, or they messed up, or something happened, or they didn't have the money, and they went to community college and they come into Berkeley, and their ability to seize these opportunities. It's not always an easy journey for them, that transition to Berkeley, but it's some of my most rewarding students. And just the the promise of the UC system, the vision, we are far from achieving that vision, but the UC system as a place where, educate a large proportion of Californians, and, we have the master plan, and even though the master plan has gotten a little tattered over the decades, like that's not something you're going to get in an Ivy school.
Wow, thank you. I think these are very important points to consider, and just things to have on the forefront of our minds when we're making decisions about public versus private schools, if we're given the opportunity to join either one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But I was very happy. I mean, I loved it there, and I got over some of my own anti kind of Ivy League biases that I had, going in there. I had some amazing students with incredible life stories as well.
Well, we're glad you came back.
I am too. I was happy to come back.
Well, and Rachel, I've just enjoyed this time, and I do want to wrap up with one final question, because you are a busy, busy professor. And so other people may not know, but you were or are serving on what we call the budget committee, and that's the committee that reviews files for faculty. And so the last question I want to ask is, and this is a question that's on many of our minds, do you think that the goalpost is shifting for promotion at any rank?
Oh, interesting. So like, has it gotten harder to get tenure and get promoted to professor? Is that your question?
Have the requirements drastically shifted based on the time?
I've only been on the budget committee. This is my second year, and I'm going to have one more year. So that's my vantage point. The thing that I have seen on the budget committee that has given me great satisfaction, and that this is also different from Ivy League schools, is the review process is surprisingly transparent at Berkeley. So let's say you have a case for tenure, you put together your materials, then it goes to an ad hoc committee. You don't know who's on that ad hoc committee, and then it goes to the chair, and the chair writes a letter, and then it goes to the dean, and the dean writes a letter, and then it goes up the food chain to campus. And, we see the case materials, we review the case, we make a recommendation, and then it goes to executive, vice chancellor, and provost, and the chancellor, and the vice provost of the faculty. Throughout that process, you have candidates, who are up for tenure or promotion, have opportunities to read what people are saying, and you have an opportunity to respond. And we have a duty to incorporate that conversation in part of our evaluation. I mean, I went up for tenure at Brown, and you submit your case materials and it goes in a black box, and you have no idea what's going on until they tell you, congratulations or sorry. So, you can ask around and stuff, but like, you don't get to actually log on to AP Bears and read these letters on the way and then, type. So I think that part of it is good. The other piece that I do like is that you do have a say of who your letter writers are. The department gets some say too, but so there's a goal to try and get, an even distribution between names submitted by the candidates and names submitted by your department. I'm not sure. Well, you're in engineering, so I don't know how it is in your field. I think what I see is not to just do bean counting of number of papers. And I think there's become a lot more openness about what constitutes, what counts. So I think a really interesting recent development is a memorandum that was, developed by the Senate and approved by the administration about what products from community engaged research should count in the research portfolio. What kind of metrics do you use to evaluate that work that may not necessarily be in a peer-reviewed journal, but should probably count as research output? So, uptake, is this something that was submitted to an agency? How is it being used? Those things didn't used to count, and now they do. These are if somebody presents that and writes about it in their self-statement, and that guidance provides some really good requirements that work count. So I'm not, I mean, since I've only been on the committee for 2 years, I don't know if the goalposts have moved in terms of more publications. I mean, I think some of the same things have always applied, like you want publications that you clearly played a lead role either as first or last senior author, that you were mentoring people to do it. Those kinds of things I think are still definitely part of the assessment. But I do think that there's been more of an openness and receptivity and valuing of the work that scientists do in collaboration with communities, and understanding that, peer-reviewed articles aren't necessarily the only output that is appropriate for people who do that kind of community engaged work, because, that's not very helpful in terms of research translation, or even how communities use the data that you have either co-collected or co-analyzed, and so there's many ways to credit some of the other products that come out of that work that may not necessarily be, the journal of this, that, and the other thing.
We on behalf of anyone listening, I certainly appreciate your transparency here and this wonderful guidance. In full transparency, I've heard this, you all. I've heard it before because I get to be amongst brilliant scholars like Rachel all the time who are willing to sit down and talk. And so for those of you that don't really have access to someone like Rachel, I hope that this conversation sheds light on some of the ways in which you can be successful when resources are there structurally, when you have a mentor, and you can benchmark your experience, right? From hearing from someone that has just rocked the research world, has trailblazed in the field of environmental justice and environmental health sciences and data science. And Rachel, thank you so much for this time.
Thank you. That was great.
Yep. And with that, I'd like to sign off, and we'll see you all in the next video.